What happens when the most composed, most controlled, most professionally immovable female CEO in the Pacific Northwest leans toward a man she barely knows at the most important gala of her company's calendar year and whispers, with her hand gripping the edge of the table and her face doing a version of calm that is costing her everything she has left? "Take me home right now, or I will make sure you no longer have a job by morning." And what happens when the man she says this to, a 37-year-old facilities coordinator named Marcus Webb, who has been with the company for 4 months and has a 6-year-old daughter named June, who he is going to pick up from his mother's house at exactly 11 o'clock tonight, and who is therefore not especially in the mood to lose the job that pays for June's school, in June's pediatrician, and the 2-bedroom apartment in Tacoma that is finally, after 3 years of being too small and too expensive, starting to feel like a home? Looks at this woman and sees not the threat she has just delivered, but something underneath it that the threat is working extremely hard to cover. And what happens on the 40-minute drive from the hotel in downtown Seattle to an address in Laurelhurst that she gives him in the voice of someone reciting something from memory because they have been holding it together with both hands for the past hour and are now down to one? Her name was Rachel Cho. She was 39 years old, and she had been the CEO of Cascade Digital, a mid-sized cloud infrastructure company headquartered in Bellevue, Washington, for 3 years. Before that, she had been the COO for 4 years, and before that, the VP of Engineering for 2, and before that, the lead architect of the platform that the company was now built on, which meant she had been inside this company for 9 years and had built more of it than anyone currently employed there, including the founder, who had retired to a sailboat in the San Juan Islands and called her twice a month with opinions she mostly did not request. She was known for 3 things professionally. The first was her technical precision. She could read a system architecture diagram and find the failure point before the engineer who built it could, which was a skill that saved the company from 3 catastrophic product launches and 1 near acquisition that would have been a disaster. The second was her composure. She had been in a server outage meeting at 2 in the morning when a major client's entire infrastructure went down, and she had been the calmest person in the room by a significant margin, which was saying something because the room also contained people whose entire professional identity was built on being calm in crises. The third was her privacy. She did not discuss her personal life, she did not attend company social events in a personal capacity, she did not allow the boundary between what she did and who she was to become porous in any direction. This was why when the panic attacks had started 8 months ago, nobody at Cascade Digital had any idea. They had begun quietly, the way most things that are going to become significant begin. The first one had been on a plane to San Francisco for a client meeting, which was explicable as turbulence anxiety, and which she had treated by gripping the armrest and breathing through it, and landing and presenting to the client with complete professional precision. The second had been in an elevator in the Bellevue office, which she had treated by walking up 11 flights of stairs for the next 3 weeks until she had built enough exposure to make the elevator survivable again. The third had been in a meeting, which was the one that had frightened her, because meetings were her domain. Meetings were where she was most herself, and to have the floor go soft and the room go loud and her heartbeat make itself known in her ears in the middle of a quarterly review had felt like a violation of the one place she had considered completely safe. She had seen a therapist, she was doing the work, she was making, the therapist said, genuine progress. The panic attacks had become less frequent, less severe, more manageable with the techniques she had developed. She had not had a significant episode in 6 weeks. The gala was the Cascade Digital annual partner event. It was held every November at the Fairmont Olympic in downtown Seattle. It was 140 guests, clients, investors, partners, board, in a ballroom that cost more per evening than most people's monthly rent, and it was the single most important social event on the company's calendar year, the one where Rachel was not just the CEO managing logistics, but the CEO performing the specific function of embodied confidence that investors and clients needed to see in order to keep believing in the company they had chosen to build their business on. She had attended the last 2 without incident. She had prepared for this one the same way she prepared for everything, thoroughly, methodically, with attention to the specific details that were load-bearing. She had reviewed the guest list, she had reviewed the agenda, she had confirmed the seating chart and the speech timing and the AV setup and the dietary restrictions. She had worn the navy dress that had worked the last 2 years because it was comfortable and professional and she did not need to think about it. What she had not prepared for was the man at table 7. She had not recognized him at the event check-in, which was not unusual. She did not know every employee. She had not recognized him during the cocktail hour, during which she had completed approximately 47 conversations with clients, partners, and board members while tracking the room with the specific divided attention of a person who is managing a large event while also monitoring their internal state for early warning signs of the thing they are trying not to have in this room. The internal state was fine, better than fine. She had been through the cocktail hour and the dinner service and the first 2 speeches, entirely present and entirely herself. She had spoken with the founder's replacement on the board, a woman named Patricia, who was sharp and warm and whom she liked genuinely. She had managed a slightly complicated conversation with a client who was renegotiating their contract. She had given her own remarks at 9:45 and had felt them, delivering them, the specific, clean confidence of a person who was on solid ground. Then, the room changed. She could not have said what changed it. The temperature shifted slightly. The noise level of 140 people having post-speech conversations adjusted in some frequency she could not name. The room, which was a room, became a very large room with a lot of people in it and walls that were farther away than they needed to be. And the temperature inside her chest became the temperature of the beginning of something she did not want to begin in this room, in front of these people. She controlled her breathing. She set down her glass. She found the focal point her therapist had recommended, a fixed point slightly above eye level, something specific and still, and she fixed her attention on it and she breathed. It was not working the way it usually worked. She needed to leave the room. She knew this with the specific clinical clarity of someone who has been in this situation enough times to know what the internal indicators mean. She needed to leave the room within approximately the next 3 minutes, or what was happening inside her chest was going to become visible, and visible in this room in front of these people was not something she could allow. Not because her panic attacks were shameful, she had worked hard with her therapist on not believing that, but because this was not a room where vulnerability had a safe landing space, and she knew this room, and she knew what a crack in the surface would be used for by the people in it who were looking for one. She assessed her options. Her executive assistant was on the other side of the room. Her COO was in conversation with a client she could not interrupt. The board chair was 15 feet away with his back to her, and she could not reach him without crossing in front of the speaker's table in a way that would be noticed. There was a man at table 7 who had stood up a few minutes ago to get water from the service station near the wall, and now was on his way back to his seat along the perimeter of the room. He was moving along the wall, not the center. He was close to her. He was not in a conversation. He was carrying a water glass and walking with the steady, unhurried quality of someone who was simply moving from one place to another. She did not know his name. She did not know what he did. She knew he was at table 7, which was the facilities and operations group, which meant he worked in her building, which meant she could, technically, in the most desperate application of this principle, use the authority structure. She made a decision that she would think about for a very long time afterwards. She stepped slightly into his path. He stopped, automatically, with the reflexive courtesy of someone who doesn't walk into people. He looked at her, not the recognition look of someone who had met her before, but the respectful attention of someone who is aware that the CEO is standing in front of him. She leaned slightly toward him. She kept her voice low enough that it did not carry past the two of them. She said, "I need you to take me home right now." She paused, "Or I will make sure you no longer have a job by morning." The words came out. She heard them. They were terrible words. They were the words of a person who has run out of every other option and reached the most embarrassing one and deployed it with the authority voice, because the authority voice was the only voice she had left. He looked at her. She looked at him. She could see him processing the sentence. She could see him deciding what kind of situation he was in. She was 38 seconds from the thing she did not want to have in this room in front of these people. He said, "Okay." He did not hesitate. He did not ask why. He said, "Do you have a coat?" She said, "Coat check, blue tag." He said, "I'll get it. Walk toward the exit, slowly, like you're going to take a call." He paused. "Can you do that?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Go." She walked toward the exit, slowly. She was on her phone, she was looking at her phone. She was doing the specific performed exit of a person who has received a message that requires her attention. She went through the ballroom door and into the hotel corridor, and the corridor was quieter and cooler, and she stood against the wall beside an ornamental plant and breathed. He came through the door 90 seconds later with her coat. He said, "Here." She put the coat on. Her hands were not entirely steady. She watched her do this without comment and without the expression that people usually had when they were watching someone in distress, which was either helpless or intrusive. He just watched with the specific alert practicality of someone who was assessing what needed to happen next. He said, "Can you walk to the lobby?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Good, let's go." She walked beside him through the hotel corridor and into the lobby, and through the lobby to the entrance where the valets were. She breathed. The lobby was better than the ballroom.
The air was better. The walls were where walls should be. He said, "I don't have my car. I took the shuttle." She said, "I have a car service." She found her phone and texted the driver. She said, 5 minutes. He stood beside her and did not talk. She was grateful for this in a way she did not have the capacity to express in the moment. He did not ask what was happening. He did not offer theories. He stood beside her on the Fairmont Olympic entrance steps in the November Seattle night and let 5 minutes be 5 minutes. The car came. He held the door. She got in. He got in the other side. She gave the driver the address. The car moved. For the first several minutes, she looked out the window and worked through the remaining activation with the techniques she had developed over 8 months of this work. The cold air had helped. The smaller space helped. The movement helped. She could feel the floor returning to where floors were supposed to be. At some point, she became aware that she had deployed a threat at an employee of her company and then accepted his help and was now sitting in the back seat of a car going to her house and did not know his name. She said, "I don't know your name." He said, "Marcus Webb, facilities coordinator. I've been with the company 4 months." She said, "Marcus." She paused. "I owe you an explanation." He said, "You don't have to." She said, "I do." She looked at the street. "What I said to you in that room was—" She stopped. She started again. "I had a panic attack, or the beginning of one. I needed to leave and I needed someone to help me leave without—" She paused. "Without making it something." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Panic attacks are serious." She said, "I'm aware." He said, I'm not minimizing what you said. I'm saying I understand why you needed to get out." She looked at him. He was looking at the street ahead with the same steady quality she had noticed when he was walking along the wall of the ballroom, a person who was simply oriented toward whatever was in front of him, without the performance of being unbothered. She said, "You have a daughter." He looked at her. She said, "Table 7 is facilities and operations. I know Derek Huang runs that group, and he mentioned his team at our last all hands. He said one of his team members had to leave early for pickup." She paused. "That was you." He said, "June, she's 6. He paused. "My mother is watching her until 11. She said, "What time is it?" He looked at his phone. 9:58. She said, "We'll make 11. He said, "It's okay." She looked at the window. She said, "The address I gave the driver is 20 minutes from here. I'll have the driver take you to your mother's after." He said, "That's not necessary." She said, "It is." She paused. "Marcus, I threatened your job. In a ballroom, in front of 140 people's peripheral vision." She looked at him. "I am aware of what I did." He said, "You were in a crisis." He said it plainly, without judgment. "You needed help, and you asked for it in the only way you had available." He paused. "I've seen worse decisions made in better circumstances." She said, "Have you?" He said, "I was a paramedic for 8 years before this." He said it in the way he said most things, simply, as context, without asking for a response to it. People in a crisis say things. The thing they say matters less than whether someone actually helps. She turned to look at him properly for the first time since the ballroom. He was looking at the Seattle night going past outside the window, the lights on the water, the bridges, the specific November version of a city that was made for rain and had learned to be beautiful in it. She said, "Why did you become a facilities coordinator?" He said, "My daughter needed me available at 3:15 every afternoon." He paused. "Paramedic shifts don't work that way." She said, "You gave up your career for her pickup time?" He said, "I didn't give it up." He looked at her.
I reorganized around what mattered most. He paused. June had lost her mother at 2 years old. Being at the gate when school let out mattered. He said it without sentiment, just fact, the way he said things. She said, "I'm sorry," about her mother. He said, "Thank you." They were quiet. The car moved through the Seattle night. She felt in the specific, accumulated way of a person whose body has been running on high alert for an hour and has been given permission to stand down. Very tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that means it is over. She said, "At the all hands, when Derek mentioned the team, he said you had redesigned the routing system for the third-floor facilities management and taken 2 hours off the weekly maintenance cycle." He said, "The original routing had redundancy that wasn't load-bearing." He paused. It was a simple fix once you mapped the actual traffic pattern against the existing schedule. She said, "Load-bearing redundancy." He said, "Most systems have it. Processes that got added for a reason that no longer exists." He looked at the street. You look for what the system actually needs to do and build the path around that instead of what someone needed 3 years ago. She was quiet. Then, "That is a systems architecture principle." He said, "It's a general principle." He looked at her. "It applies to most things." She said, "Marcus, what did you do before you were a paramedic?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I finished 2 years of a computer science degree. Then my mother got sick and I needed income fast. Emergency services hired quickly." He paused. "I finished the degree online over the next 4 years, but by then I was doing the paramedic work and I was good at it and I stayed." She said, "A computer science degree?" He said, "Unfinished." She said, 2 years of computer science, 8 years of paramedicine, and 4 months of facilities coordination." She paused. "And you redesigned the routing system in your 3rd month." He said, "It was bothering me." She said, "Systems that are inefficient bother you." He said, "Don't they all bother you?" She looked at him. She said, "Not everyone notices them." The car pulled onto her street. The Laurelhurst house was lit from inside in the specific warm way of a house that has good lighting and has been lived in long enough to feel like the lighting is part of it. The driver pulled to the curb. She said, "Marcus," she paused, "I need to say something before we go further in this conversation." He looked at her. She said, "What I said in the ballroom, I need you to know that I will not use that against you." She met his eyes. "You have my word. Your position is not in any jeopardy because of tonight." She paused. "And if anything I said or did tonight made you feel that it was, I want you to tell me and I will address it immediately." He looked at her for a moment. He said, "I didn't think you'd actually fire me." She said, "Why not?" He said, "Because the way you said it was wrong." He looked at the street. "When people actually mean a threat, they say it differently." His voice was even. "You said it the way someone says something they immediately know is the wrong thing to say and say it anyway because they're out of better options." She was quiet. She said, "That is an accurate description." He said, "I figured you needed help and you'd apologize later." She said, "I'm apologizing now." He said, "Accepted." He paused. "How are you feeling?" She said, "Better, significantly." She paused. The cold air helped. The car helped. She looked at her hands. "You helped." He said, "You did the work." She said, "You stood next to me on the steps and didn't talk. That was the work." He looked at her. She said, "People want to talk. When they can see something is wrong, they want to fill the space with something helpful." She paused. "You just stood there and let the 5 minutes be 5 minutes. That was exactly right, and I don't know how you knew it." He said, 8 years of standing next to people when something was wrong." He said it simply. "Sometimes there's nothing useful to say. Presence is the useful thing." She nodded. She looked at the house. She said, "Come in for a minute." She saw him about to decline. "I'm not asking to extend the evening. I want to call you a proper car service, and I want to make sure you make 11. He came inside. The house was warm and quiet and full of the specific settled feeling of a house that had been lived in carefully. Books on a shelf that ran the length of one wall, a kitchen that showed evidence of genuine use, a coat rack near the door with exactly one coat on it, which told him something, a framed drawing near the stairs that looked like a child had done it, which told him something else. He stood in the front hall while she called the car service. She made coffee while they waited, without asking, and brought 2 cups to the kitchen counter, and he sat on one of the bar stools, and she stood on the other side of the counter, and they were quiet for a moment. She said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Probably."
She said, "The routing system. When you redesigned it, did you document the new process or just implement it?" He said, "Document it. I put together a one-page explanation of the change and the reasoning and left it in the shared drive with the maintenance logs." She said, "Who did you notify?" He said, "Derek, and I emailed the third-floor team leads so they knew the maintenance windows had shifted." She looked at her coffee cup. She said, "Most people implement the fix and move on." He said, "If you don't document why, the next person doesn't know what problem the fix was solving. 2 years later, someone puts the redundancy back because they think it was removed by mistake." She nodded slowly. He said, "Systems need institutional memory, not just solutions." She looked at him. She said, "Institutional memory?" He said, "Documentation is how organizations remember things. Otherwise, the knowledge lives in whoever learned it and walks out when they leave." She said, "Marcus?" She said it the way she said things that she was about to be direct about. "What are you doing in facilities?" He said, "Earning a living and being home at 3:15. She said, "I know." She paused. "I also know that the skills you just described and the reasoning you just applied are not facilities coordination skills." She held his gaze. "They are systems engineering skills." He said, "I don't have the credential for." She said, "Our internal mobility program doesn't require external credentials for lateral moves." She paused. "It requires demonstrated competency and a manager's endorsement." She looked at him. "You have demonstrated competency in the last 45 minutes of conversation alone, not counting the routing system." She paused. "I am the CEO. I am also a manager." She looked at him steadily. "I would like you to speak to our engineering operations director next week. Her name is Sue Jin Park. She has been
Looking for someone with systems thinking and process architecture experience for 4 months. She paused. "The role pays what the credential pays, not what the title you currently have pays." He said, "Rachel." She said, "I'm not doing this because of tonight." She met his eyes. "I'm doing it because I run a company that is supposed to find and keep good people, and I have had a good person in my building for 4 months that my system did not surface because his current title said facilities." She paused. "That is a failure of my system, not of the person." He was quiet. He looked at the coffee cup. He said, "The hours." She said, "Engineering operations is a project-based role. Core hours are 10 to 3. She paused. "I will confirm that with Sue Jin before you meet her." He looked at her. He said, "You confirmed Derek's mention of pickup at an all-hands and remembered it was me tonight." She said, "I told you. I notice when systems miss things they should catch." He said, "Am I a systems failure?" She said, "You are someone my system categorized incorrectly." She paused. "Those are different problems with different solutions." He was quiet. The car service notification arrived on her phone. She showed him the screen. 8 minutes. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Go ahead." He said, "The panic attacks. How long?" She said, 8 months. She said it directly, the way she said everything that was true. She paused. "I'm in treatment. I'm making progress. Tonight was the first significant episode in 6 weeks." He said, "What triggered it?" She said, "I don't know exactly. The room, probably. The specific combination of..." She paused. "The size of it, and the stakes of it, and the number of people who needed me to be one specific thing for the entire evening." She looked at the counter. "I am better at managing it than I was. Tonight was a setback." He said, "Setbacks aren't reversals." He said it the way a paramedic says a clinical fact. "They're part of recovery." She looked at him. He said, "You didn't go under. You found an exit. That's the skill." She said, "The exit was you." He said, "The exit was you knowing you needed one." He met his eyes. "I was just the nearest door." She looked at him. She said, "You were a very specific kind of person." He said, "What kind?" She said, "The kind that makes everything more manageable by being exactly what is needed and not asking for anything in return for it." He said, "June is that kind of person too." He said it with the warmth that came into his voice only when he mentioned her, a quality that was different from everything else he said, warmer and more unguarded.
She makes everything she's part of better. He paused. I'm still figuring out if I taught her that or if she arrived with it. She said, how old was she when her mother died? He said, 2. She looked at him. He said, she doesn't remember. He paused. I try to make sure she doesn't need to feel the absence of it. He said it simply, as a task he had set himself, in the way he described all tasks, as things to be done correctly. She said, do you think that's possible? He thought about it. He said, I think the presence of enough love makes the shape of the absence smaller over time. He looked at the counter. Not gone, smaller. She was quiet. She thought about the house with one coat on the coat rack. She thought about the 6-year-old who needed to be picked up at 3:15. She thought about a man who had reorganized his entire professional life around a gate and a child, and then, in the reconfigured space that life provided, redesigned a routing system because inefficiency bothered him. The car arrived. He stood up. She walked him to the door. At the door, he said, Rachel. She said, yes. He said, thank you for the referral to Sujin. He paused. And for the car. She said, thank you for getting my coat. He said, that was the easy part. She said, it was the most important part. He looked at her. She said, you came through a door in a ballroom with my coat, and you asked me one question, and you didn't ask any more after that. She paused. The question was exactly right, and the silence after it was exactly right. She met his eyes. I don't know how you knew. He said, I told you. 8 years of knowing what someone needed next. He paused. You needed the coat and the car and someone to not turn it into a thing. She said, most people turn it into a thing. He said, most people are trying to help in a way that makes them feel helpful. He said it without judgment. That's different from helping in a way that actually helps. She looked at him. She said, good night, Marcus. He said, good night. He paused at the door. June is going to ask me tomorrow why I got home at 11:15 instead of 11. She said, what will you tell her? He said, that someone needed a door and I happened to be the nearest one. He smiled. She'll understand that. She's the same way. He walked down the front path to the waiting car and got in, and Rachel stood in the doorway of her Laurelhurst house and watched the car pull away into the November Seattle night, and she thought about a child she had never met who was 6 years old and made everything she was part of better, in a man who had reorganized his entire life around a gate and a child, in a routing system fixed because inefficiency bothered him, in a coat retrieved from coat check with a blue tag, in 8 years of knowing what someone needed next. She closed the door. She stood in her front hall. The house was warm. She was tired in the right way, the way that meant the body had done something real and had been given permission to rest. The panic attack that had not happened in this room full of these people was a thing she had managed, not perfectly, not without a wildly inappropriate sentence delivered in a ballroom to a man she did not know, but managed. She went to her phone. She sent an email to Sujin Park at 11:14 on a November Tuesday evening. The subject line was, Internal candidate I want you to meet. The body of the email was 2 paragraphs, both factual, both specific, neither of which mentioned a ballroom or a coat or a November night or the particular way a person can stand next to you on the steps of a hotel and let 5 minutes be 5 minutes and make that feel like the most useful thing in the world. She was the CEO. She noticed when her systems missed things they should catch. She had found one. She was going to make sure the system didn't miss him again. Marcus met with Sujin Park the following Thursday. The meeting was scheduled for 45 minutes and ran to 2 hours. Sujin emailed Rachel at 4:15 that afternoon with a message that said, where has this person been? Rachel wrote back, 4th floor, the routing system. Sujin wrote, I know about the routing system. I'm asking why it took 4 months to get him in front of me. Rachel wrote, that's the question I'm working on. He started the engineering operations role 6 weeks later.
His hours were 10 to 3. He was at the gate at 3:15. June asked him 2 months in why he seemed different when he came home now. He said, "Different how?" She said, "Lighter." He thought about it. He said, "I think I've found work that fits the shape of what I'm actually good at." She said, "Like a puzzle piece?" He said, "Yes, exactly like a puzzle piece." She considered this. Then, "Daddy, was the old job the wrong-shaped hole?" He said, "Yes, Bug. I think it was." She nodded with the gravity of someone filing important information. She went back to her drawing. He looked at what she was drawing. It was a door. He looked at it for a moment. He said, "What's the door for?" She said, "It's for people who need one." She kept drawing. "Everybody needs a door sometimes." He looked at his daughter and thought about a woman in a navy dress in a ballroom in November, in a sentence that was exactly the wrong words, in exactly the right ask, in a coat retrieved from coat check with a blue tag, in 8 years of knowing what someone needed next. Everybody needs a door sometimes. June was 6 years old, and she already knew that. If this story found you today, share it with someone who has been a door for someone else without being asked. Subscribe for a brand new story every single week. We will see you next time.